wild German shepherd trapped, its powerful body tangled in rusted barbed wire, its spirit dimming with each passing hour. No one knew how long it had been suffering, how long it had been fighting alone. Most people would have called animal control, too afraid to approach such a magnificent but dangerous creature. But one rancher stepped forward. What happened next was something no one could have predicted. A story of courage, trust, and an unforgettable bond that would change both their lives forever. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Texas rangeland as Mitchell Morgan drove his weathered pickup truck along the fence line of his family's ranch. At 58, Mitchell had seen almost everything these 10,000 acres could throw at him. He'd inherited the Morgan Ranch from his father, who'd inherited it from his father before him. 3 generations of blood, sweat, and determination had built this place into one of the most respected cattle operations in South Texas. Mitchell had been up since 4 a.m., as was his custom, checking fence lines and water sources before the heat of the day set in. His border collie Rex usually rode shotgun with him on these morning rounds, but the old dog was recovering from a snake bite and resting at the house. So Mitchell rode alone, something that normally didn't bother him. He'd spent most of his adult life in solitude after his son Daniel was killed in Iraq 5 years ago. The land was his companion now, along with his cattle, and the occasional visit from his daughter, who lived in Dallas. But that morning, something was different. The usual symphony of the ranch. Cattle lowing in the distance, meadowlarks singing from fence posts, the distant bark of coyotes heading back to their dens, was interrupted by something else. A desperate barking, sharp and distressed, carried on the morning breeze. Mitchell slowed the truck, his calloused hands tightening on the steering wheel as he scanned the horizon. His grandfather had always told him that the land would speak to you if you knew how to listen. Pay attention to what doesn't belong, the old man used to say. That's usually where you'll find trouble or opportunity. Then he saw it. About 50 yards from the dirt road, caught in a section of old barbed wire fencing that bordered the abandoned Hartley place, was a German shepherd. Mitchell's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't a ranch dog or someone's lost pet. He could tell that immediately. The dog wore a faded tactical vest, the kind military and police dogs used. The vest was torn and weathered, but still clearly marked with EODK 9 patches. Explosive Ordnance Disposal. This was a bomb detection dog. The shepherd was magnificent, easily 80 pounds of lean muscle, with a black and tan coat that would have been lustrous if not for the dust and blood. But what broke Mitchell's heart was the state he was in. The barbed wire had wrapped around his hind leg and torso like some cruel trap, the sharp metal barbs cutting deep welts into his flesh. Dark stains of dried blood matted his coat, where he'd struggled against the wire for what must have been hours. Mitchell cut the engine and sat in stunned silence. The dog's sides heaved with exhaustion, his breathing labored and shallow. Foam gathered at the corners of his mouth, a sign of severe stress and dehydration. His left hind leg, the one most entangled in the wire, bore the worst damage. The barbs had cut through to muscle, and Mitchell could see the white gleam of bone beneath the wounds. For a moment, their eyes met across the distance. Mitchell had looked into the eyes of countless dogs throughout his life. Gentle ranch dogs, spirited puppies, ancient companions, wise with years. But this was different. In those dark, intelligent eyes, he saw pain and fear. Yes, but also something he'd rarely witnessed in any animal, the disciplined assessment of a trained professional evaluating a potential threat or ally. Most trapped creatures would fight with every ounce of strength until death took them. This dog had stopped struggling but remained alert, tactical, watching Mitchell with the focused attention of a soldier maintaining his post despite impossible circumstances. The dog let out another bark, not aggressive or warning, but urgent, communicative. Mitchell felt something twist deep in his chest. He'd heard that exact type of alert bark before, from the military dogs Daniel had described in his letters home. Mitchell's heart hammered against his ribs as he weighed his options. The smart thing would be to call the county sheriff, maybe try to track down the military base 200 miles south. They'd have protocols for handling military dogs. A trained bomb dog could be dangerous, especially one that was injured and traumatized. But as Mitchell looked into those dark, disciplined eyes again, he felt time slipping away. The dog was dehydrating fast in the Texas heat, which was already climbing toward 90 degrees, even though it wasn't yet 8 a.m. Blood loss, shock, and exhaustion were taking their toll. If he drove the 20 miles to town to get help, if he waited for authorities to arrive with their equipment and protocols, the dog would be dead before anyone could cut the first strand of wire. Mitchell thought about Daniel, how his son had written lovingly about the military dogs he'd worked with. "They're not just dogs, Dad," Daniel had written. "They're soldiers. They save lives every day and never ask for recognition." The memory hit him with unexpected force. Daniel had died trying to save one of those dogs, rushing back into a firefight when their unit's K9 had been wounded. He'd managed to carry the dog to safety before a sniper's bullet found him. Mitchell made his choice. He reached behind his seat and grabbed his wire cutters, heavy-duty tools that every rancher carried for fence repairs. His grandfather's voice echoed in his mind. "Son, sometimes being a rancher means you have to do things that scare you. The land and the animals don't wait for convenient timing." His boots hit the hard-packed dirt, and he began walking slowly toward the trapped dog. Each step felt deliberate, measured. He'd worked with dogs his entire life, but never a military working dog, never one trained to detect threats and protect at all costs. He spoke in low, calming tones, the same voice he'd used to gentle countless animals over the years. "Easy there, soldier. Easy now. I know you're scared, but I'm here to help." The shepherd's ears tracked toward him, rotating like radar dishes following his movement. His nostrils flared wide, catching Mitchell's scent. Human, but also cattle, leather, hay, and the honest smell of a man who'd spent his life working with animals. As he got closer, Mitchell could fully appreciate the dog's condition. Even trapped and wounded, he maintained military bearing. His eyes constantly scanned for additional threats, while keeping Mitchell in sight. This wasn't just any military dog. This was a highly trained explosive detection specialist who'd seen combat. "I'm not going to hurt you," Mitchell murmured, stopping about 10 feet away. "But I need to get close enough to cut that wire. You're going to have to trust me." The shepherd studied him with those dark eyes, processing, evaluating. Mitchell could see the moment when something shifted. The dog made a decision, not submission, but tactical acceptance of necessary aid. He stopped trying to shift position and held still, though his muscles remained coiled, ready to react if this human proved false. "Easy, soldier," Mitchell murmured as he knelt slowly beside the trapped animal, moving with the deliberate care of a man who understood that one wrong move could trigger a trained response. "I'm going to help you, but this is going to hurt." Up close, the damage was even worse than he'd thought. The wire wasn't just wrapped around the dog's leg and torso, it had twisted during his struggles, creating a vicious tangle that had tightened with every movement. Some of the barbs had buried themselves so deep they disappeared entirely into his flesh. The wounds were contaminated with rust and dirt. Mitchell's hands trembled slightly as he positioned the wire cutters, not from fear of the dog, though he was certainly aware of the danger, but from the weight of responsibility. One slip, one cut in the wrong place, and he could sever an artery. The first strand was wrapped around the dog's chest, restricting his breathing. Mitchell could feel the shepherd's heart pounding as he worked the cutters into position. The dog's body was rigid with pain and stress, but he held position like the professional he was. "This first one's going to hurt the worst," Mitchell warned, as if the dog could understand. "But then it'll start getting better." With careful pressure, he squeezed the handles. The old wire was tough, corroded with rust, and it took more force than expected. When it finally snapped, the sound was sharp and metallic in the morning air. The shepherd flinched violently, but didn't bite, didn't lash out. Instead, he turned his head to look directly at Mitchell, and in that gaze was something remarkable. Not just animal intelligence, but trained discipline, overriding instinct. For a terrifying moment, every muscle in the dog's body coiled for action. Mitchell froze, not even breathing, certain that the dog's training would kick in, that he'd be seen as a threat to neutralize. But then something extraordinary happened. The shepherd deliberately relaxed his jaw, lowered his head slightly, and gave a soft woof, not aggressive, but communicative, permission to continue. "You understand, don't you?" Mitchell whispered. "You know I'm trying to help." The second wire was around the dog's hind leg. This one had cut the deepest, and Mitchell could see exposed muscle and possibly damaged tendons. Blood welled up immediately when the wire released its grip, flowing more freely than Mitchell liked. Wire by wire, Mitchell worked with surgical precision. Each cut brought fresh pain, and each time the shepherd would tense, his training and instincts warring with the need to remain still. But he never attacked, never even growled. His discipline was absolute and humbling. Mitchell found himself talking constantly, explaining what he was doing, sharing stories about Daniel and the ranch. "My son would have loved you," he said, carefully maneuvering around a particularly nasty tangle. "He wrote me about dogs like you, said you were the bravest soldiers he knew." The sun climbed higher, and sweat dripped from Mitchell's forehead onto his hands, making the wire cutters slippery. His back ached from the awkward position, and his knees protested against the hard ground. But he didn't dare take a break. The shepherd was weakening with each passing minute. When he reached the final strand, the one wrapped tightest around the injured leg, Mitchell hesitated. This wire was practically embedded in the flesh, and removing it would cause excruciating pain. "I know this is going to be bad, soldier, but it's the last one," he whispered, positioning the cutters with extreme care. "After this, you'll be free." The shepherd seemed to sense the significance of the moment. He turned his head to look directly at Mitchell, and in his eyes was something that took Mitchell's breath away: complete trust. This highly trained military animal was placing his life entirely in Mitchell's hands. With a final careful squeeze, Mitchell cut the last wire. It sprang free with violent force, whipping through the air and leaving a deep gash in its wake. The shepherd lifted his head and let out a sound. Not quite a bark, not quite a howl, but something primal and relieved. Mitchell scrambled backward, giving him space, certain that the dog would bolt immediately. But instead, the shepherd carefully tested his injured leg, putting minimal weight on it. He took one tentative step, then another. Blood dripped steadily from his wounds, but he was mobile. Then he did something that shattered every assumption Mitchell had about military dogs. He limped directly to Mitchell and with precise military bearing, sat at perfect heel position, not fleeing, not attacking, but reporting for duty to the human who'd freed him. Mitchell's eyes burned with unshed tears. "At ease, soldier," he said softly. "You're safe now." But Mitchell's relief was short-lived. As he examined the shepherd's injuries more closely, reality set in. The dog was free from the wire, but he was badly wounded, dehydrated, and vulnerable. Infection was almost certain without proper treatment. In the wild, or even trying to survive alone, injured dogs rarely made it. The shepherd was bleeding steadily, unable to put full weight on his injured leg. Mitchell knew he couldn't just leave him, but he also knew that what happened next would determine whether this rescue ended in triumph or tragedy. "We're not done yet, are we?" Mitchell said quietly, looking into the dog's eyes. "You need medical attention, and you need it fast." Mitchell retrieved his first aid kit and several bottles of water from his truck, his mind racing. He'd treated injured cattle countless times, but this was different. This was a trained military animal with combat experience, possibly suffering from PTSD in addition to his physical wounds. Moving slowly and deliberately, Mitchell returned to the shepherd's side. The dog watched his every movement, but didn't retreat. When Mitchell opened a bottle of water and poured it into his cupped hands, the shepherd drank gratefully, but maintained tactical awareness, eyes constantly scanning even while drinking. "I don't know if you understand me," Mitchell said, as he began carefully cleaning the worst wounds, "but you're going to need stitches for some of these cuts and antibiotics. These wounds are already showing signs of infection." The shepherd's ears tracked Mitchell's voice with the focused attention of a soldier receiving mission briefing. When Mitchell offered more water, the dog drank with disciplined restraint, enough to help, not so much that he'd be sluggish if he needed to move quickly. The simple act of trust, a military dog accepting aid from a civilian stranger, moved Mitchell more than he'd expected. Mitchell pulled an old blanket from his truck and spread it in the shade of a mesquite tree, creating a clean spot for the shepherd to rest. To his amazement, the dog evaluated the position tactically, checking sight lines and escape routes, before carefully lowering himself down with a soft grunt of pain. As the morning progressed into afternoon, Mitchell called his veterinarian, Dr. James Harrison. James had been an Army veterinarian before setting up practice in town, and if anyone could help, it would be him. "A military working dog?" James asked over the phone, his voice sharpening with interest. "EOD? Mitchell, are you absolutely certain about this?" "The vest says EODK9, Mitchell replied, watching as the shepherd lifted his head to track a distant sound. "And James, he's not acting like a stray or abandoned pet. He's still on duty." There was a long pause. "I'm on my way." "But Mitchell, be careful. Military dogs, especially ones who've seen combat, can be unpredictable when injured." "I don't think he's unpredictable," Mitchell said, watching the shepherd maintain overwatch despite his exhaustion. "I think he's looking for his handler." While they waited for Dr. Harrison to arrive, Mitchell sat beside the shepherd, offering water and simply keeping him company. The dog seemed to appreciate his presence, occasionally touching Mitchell's hand with his nose, not seeking affection, but confirming Mitchell's position, maintaining situational awareness. "You remind me of Daniel," Mitchell said quietly. "He was like you, always on duty, always watching out for others, even when he was hurting." The shepherd's ear twitched toward him at Daniel's name, and for a moment, Mitchell could have sworn the dog was trying to communicate something specific. Those intelligent eyes held knowledge, experience, and what looked like recognition. Dr. Harrison arrived with his mobile clinic 2 hours later, taking one look at the scene and whistling low. That's a Max, all right. Malinois Shepherd Cross, bred specifically for military work. He approached slowly, noting the dog's tactical positioning and alert status despite his injuries. "Hello, soldier," James said, in a calm, professional tone. "I'm here to help." The shepherd evaluated James with the same intensity he'd shown Mitchell, but when the vet displayed his hands, empty, non-threatening, and moved with military precision, the dog relaxed marginally. He'd recognized something in James's bearing, the way he moved, that marked him as military. "These wounds are serious," James murmured as he examined the shepherd. "Some are infected, and this leg—" He carefully manipulated the injured limb. "No breaks, but severe tissue damage. He's going to need surgery." The shepherd remained perfectly still during the examination, only occasionally tensing when James hit a particularly painful spot. His discipline was remarkable. Most dogs would need sedation for this level of examination. "There's something else," James said, discovering a small pocket in the tactical vest. Inside was a blood-stained ID card. MWD Ranger, Handler, SSG Marcus Webb, KIA 06/10. The date was 4 months ago. Mitchell's hands shook as he read the card. This dog had been surviving alone for 4 months after losing his handler in combat. The loyalty, the determination to continue his mission despite everything, was staggering. "He's been looking for his handler," Mitchell said, his voice thick with emotion. 4 months of searching." James nodded grimly. "Military dogs often can't accept that their handler is gone. They keep searching, keep working, because that's all they know." The treatment took 3 hours. James cleaned and sutured wounds, administered antibiotics, and set up an IV for fluids. Ranger, they now had his name, remained conscious throughout, his training preventing him from accepting sedation. He needed to maintain awareness, to be ready. "He's going to need intensive care," James explained as he packed his equipment. "Daily wound treatment, antibiotics, possibly physical therapy for that leg, and Mitchell," he paused, "he's going to need psychological help too. This dog has severe PTSD." Mitchell nodded, his mind already made up. "I'll take care of him." "The military will want their dog back," James warned. "He's government property." "Then they can come get him when he's healed," Mitchell said firmly. "But right now, he needs help, and I'm the only one here to give it." After James left, Mitchell faced the challenge of getting Ranger to a place where he could properly care for him. The ranch had a climate-controlled workshop that could be converted into a recovery space, secure, quiet, with good sight lines that would help Ranger feel tactically safe. Moving him was delicate. Mitchell backed his truck as close as possible, then created a ramp using planks. Ranger, despite his injuries, evaluated the tactical situation before moving. When he determined the truck bed was secure, high ground, good visibility, multiple exit points, he carefully climbed in. The ride back to the ranch was slow and careful. Ranger maintained overwatch throughout, his head swiveling to track potential threats, even in his weakened state. When they arrived, he waited for Mitchell's all clear before disembarking. Proper military protocol even now. The workshop transformation took the rest of the day. Mitchell created multiple water stations. Ranger would want options, and set up bedding that allowed the dog to position himself with clear sight lines to all entrances. He installed a baby monitor so he could check on Ranger without constantly invading his space. That first night, Mitchell barely slept. Every few hours, he checked the monitor to find Ranger awake, maintaining watch despite his exhaustion. The dog had positioned himself to observe all possible entry points while keeping his injured side protected. By the third day, a routine had developed. Mitchell would arrive at dawn with medical supplies and food. Ranger would be waiting at attention, having heard the truck long before it arrived. The greeting was always the same, a professional acknowledgement, not pet-like enthusiasm, but military courtesy. "Morning, Ranger," Mitchell would say, and the shepherd would respond with a soft woof of acknowledgement before allowing medical treatment. The wounds were healing well, but Mitchell noticed other issues. Ranger would sometimes freeze mid-movement, his entire body rigid as if responding to a threat only he could perceive. Loud noises sent him into tactical mode, searching for IEDs that weren't there. He refused to eat unless Mitchell cleared the food first, checking it for threats. "You're safe here, soldier," Mitchell would tell him during these episodes. "No threats, no bombs, stand down." Sometimes it helped. Sometimes Ranger would look at him with those haunted eyes, wanting to believe but unable to stop the vigilance that had kept him alive in combat zones. One morning during the second week, Mitchell arrived to find Ranger highly agitated, pacing despite his injured leg. The dog was alerting on something, giving the same distinctive bark Mitchell had heard that first day. Following Ranger's lead, the shepherd moving with tactical precision despite his limp, Mitchell discovered what had triggered the response. In the far pasture, hidden in tall grass, was a piece of old farm equipment that had partially buried itself. To most, it was just rusty metal. To Ranger's trained senses, it resembled an IED. "Not a threat, Ranger," Mitchell said clearly. "Farm equipment, safe." But Ranger continued alerting until Mitchell cleared the area, walking a careful grid pattern around the equipment while Ranger watched. Only when Mitchell gave the all-clear signal, learned from watching Ranger's own behaviors, did the shepherd relax. The incident gave Mitchell an idea. Ranger needed purpose, needed to work. His identity was tied to his training. Without a mission, he was lost. The next day, Mitchell created a training course in an empty paddock. Using harmless objects, he set up search scenarios. Nothing dangerous, nothing that would trigger trauma, just enough to let Ranger do what he was born to do. "Ranger, search," Mitchell commanded, using the tone he'd heard James employ. The transformation was immediate. Ranger became a different dog, focused, confident, purposeful. He worked the grid pattern with methodical precision, alerting on each hidden object with professional satisfaction. When he completed the course, Ranger returned to Mitchell's side and sat at perfect heel, looking up expectantly. For the first time since the rescue, his tail wagged, just once, but unmistakably. "Good boy," Mitchell said, his voice thick with emotion. "Good soldier." Word of Ranger's presence spread quickly through the rural community. Veterans began visiting, drawn by the story of the bomb dog who'd survived alone after losing his handler. Ranger seemed to recognize them as fellow warriors, offering a unique understanding that transcended species. One visitor changed everything. Master Sergeant Patricia Cole arrived 3 weeks after the rescue, wearing civilian clothes but carrying herself with unmistakable military bearing. "I knew Marcus Webb," she said simply. "We served together in Afghanistan. I heard you found his dog." Ranger's reaction was immediate and profound. He approached Patricia with recognition, sniffing her carefully, then sitting at attention. When she knelt beside him, He did something Mitchell had never seen. He rested his head on her shoulder and held it there, trembling slightly. Marcus talked about Ranger constantly, Patricia said, tears streaming down her face. They saved so many lives together. When Marcus was killed, she paused. Ranger was with him. Wouldn't leave his body. They had to physically carry him away. She produced a folder of documents. The military listed Ranger as MIA, presumed dead. Marcus's mother has been fighting to find him, hoping he survived somehow. Mitchell's heart sank. He'd known this day would come, but he wasn't prepared for how much it would hurt. Patricia read his expression. She wants to meet you, to thank you for saving him. A week later, Ellen Webb arrived at the ranch. She was a small woman in her 60s, with eyes that carried the permanent sadness of a Gold Star mother. When she saw Ranger, she gasped and pressed her hand to her mouth. Ranger approached her slowly, cautiously. Then recognition dawned in his eyes. This woman carried Marcus's scent, faint but unmistakable. He pressed against her legs, his entire body trembling, as she knelt and wrapped her arms around him. Marcus's last letter mentioned you, she told Mitchell through tears. He said, if anything happened to him, he hoped someone would take care of Ranger. He said Ranger deserved peace after everything he'd done. She looked around the ranch, observing how Ranger had positioned himself to maintain sight lines while staying close to her. Has he been working? Mitchell explained the training exercises, how Ranger needed purpose to stay stable. Ellen nodded thoughtfully. Mr. Morgan, I came here thinking I'd take Ranger home with me, but... She watched as Ranger moved to check the perimeter, then returned to Mitchell's side, sitting at heel. He's bonded with you. You understand what he needs. He's your son's dog, Mitchell said, though the words hurt to speak. You have every right. My son would want Ranger to be where he could serve a purpose, Ellen interrupted. Marcus always said Ranger would need a job, even in retirement. Looking at your ranch, seeing how you've helped him. She paused. Would you consider keeping him? Mitchell's throat was too tight to speak. He nodded. Ellen smiled through her tears. There's a program for retired military dogs. They can be officially adopted by qualified handlers. Given what you've done, I think you qualify. The paperwork took a month. During that time, Ranger continued to heal and adapt. He began accompanying Mitchell on morning rounds, his trained senses detecting problems before they became serious. He found a broken water line that could have cost thousands in damage. He alerted to a sick calf that needed immediate attention. He even detected a gas leak near the equipment barn. But his most important work was with the veterans who continued to visit. Ranger seemed to understand their struggles in ways that transcended training. He would sit quietly beside them, occasionally resting his head on their knee, offering the silent understanding that only another warrior could provide. One veteran, a young woman named Sarah, who'd lost her leg to an IED, spent hours with Ranger. He knows, she told Mitchell. He understands what it's like to lose everything and keep going anyway. On a cool morning in November, exactly 2 months after their first meeting, Mitchell received the official adoption papers. Ranger was officially his, retired with honor from military service. That evening, Mitchell sat on his porch with Ranger beside him, not at military heel, but genuinely beside him, leaning slightly against his leg. The shepherd's tactical positioning had softened into comfortable awareness. He was still vigilant, still ready, but no longer consumed by the need to be constantly on duty. You know what Daniel would have said about this? Mitchell said, running his hand along Ranger's back. He would have said, we saved each other. Ranger's response was to rest his head on Mitchell's knee. Not the desperate gesture of trauma, but the simple affection of a dog who'd finally found home. The ranch had changed since Ranger's arrival. It felt alive again, purposeful. Mitchell had partnered with a veterans organization to create a program where retired military dogs could decompress and adapt to civilian life. Ranger had become the senior advisor, teaching other dogs that vigilance could coexist with peace. 6 months after the rescue, on a morning when wildflowers painted the Texas hills in brilliant colors, Mitchell and Ranger stood at the spot where they'd first met. The old barbed wire had been replaced with smooth fencing. A small plaque marked the location, where Ranger found his second mission. "You never stopped serving, did you?" Mitchell said. "Just changed who you were protecting." Ranger's ear twitched toward him, and the shepherd performed a perfect alert, not on a threat, but on a family of deer passing through the pasture. His tail wagged once, acknowledging that some alerts could simply be observations, not warnings. They stood together as the sun climbed higher, a rancher who'd lost his son and a bomb dog who'd lost his handler, both discovering that broken hearts could still serve with purpose. That night, for the first time, Ranger truly slept. Not the light doze of a soldier on watch, but deep, peaceful sleep. His legs twitched as he dreamed, but Mitchell recognized the movements. Not nightmares of combat, but dreams of running free across Texas hills, his mission complete, his service honored, his spirit finally at peace. The greatest warriors aren't always the ones who never fall. Sometimes they're the ones who find purpose in their scars and continue to serve in whatever way they can. Ranger had proven that a soldier's heart beats the same, whether covered in fur or skin, and that the bonds forged in service transcend even death itself. Thanks for joining us on another incredible second chance story. Whether you're here for the military heroes, the healing journeys, or the unbreakable bonds between dogs and humans, your support means everything to us. If Ranger's story touched your heart, please hit that like button. It helps us share these amazing stories of canine courage with fellow dog lovers everywhere. Got a story about a service dog or military hero? Drop it in the comments below. We love hearing from our community, and your story might just inspire our next video. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest stories of dogs who refuse to give up. Until next time, remember that every dog, especially those who've served, deserves a second chance at happiness.